It was quite unnecessary to call Samuel Weller, for Samuel Weller stepped briskly into the box the instant his name was pronounced, and placing his hat on the floor and his arms on the rail, took a bird's-eye view of the bar and a comprehensive survey of the bench with a remarkably cheerful and lively aspect. "What's your name, sir?" inquired the judge. "Sam Weller, my lord," replied that gentleman. "Do you spell it with a V or a W?" inquired the judge. "That depends on the taste and fancy of the speller, my lord," replied Sam. "I never had occasion to spell it more than once or twice in my life, but I spelled it with a V." Here a voice in the gallery exclaimed aloud, "Quite right too, Samuel, quite right. Put it down a wee, my lord, put it down a wee." "Who is that who dares to address the court?" asked the little judge, looking up. "Usher." "Yes, my lord." "Bring that person here instantly." "Yes, my lord." But as the usher didn't find the person, he didn't bring him, and after a great commotion, all the people who had got up to look for the culprit sat down again. The little judge turned to the witness as soon as his indignation would allow him to speak, and said, "Do you know who that was, sir?" "I rather suspect it was my father, my lord," replied Sam. "Do you see him here now?" said the judge. "No, I don't, my lord," replied Sam, staring right up into the lantern in the roof of the court. "If you could have pointed him out, I would have committed him instantly," said the judge. Sam bowed his acknowledgments, and turned with unimpaired cheerfulness of countenance towards Sergeant Buzzfuzz. "Now, Mr. Weller," said Sergeant Buzzfuzz. "Now, sir," replied Sam. "I believe you are in the service of Mr. Pickwick, the defendant in this case. Speak up, if you please, Mr. Weller." "I mean to speak up, sir," replied Sam. "I am in the service of that 'ere gentleman, and a very good service it is." "Little to do and plenty to get, I suppose," said Sergeant Buzzfuzz with jocularity. "Ooh, quite enough to get, sir, as the soldier said when they ordered him 350 lashes," replied Sam. "You must not tell us what the soldier or any other man said, sir," interposed the judge. "It's not evidence." "Very good, my lord," replied Sam. "Do you recollect anything particular happening on the morning when you were first engaged by the defendant, Mr. Weller?" said Sergeant Buzzfuzz. "Yes, I do, sir," replied Sam. "Have the goodness to tell the jury what it was." "I had a regular new fit out of clothes that morning, gentlemen of the jury," said Sam, "and that was a very particular and uncommon circumstance with me in those days." Hereupon there was a general laugh, and the little judge, looking with an angry countenance over his desk, said, "You had better be careful, sir." "So Mr. Pickwick said at the time, my lord," replied Sam, "and I was very careful of that 'ere suit of clothes, very careful indeed, my lord." The judge looked sternly at Sam for full 2 minutes, but Sam's features were so perfectly calm and serene that the judge said nothing, and motioned Sergeant Buzzfuzz to proceed. "Do you mean to tell me, Mr. Weller," said Sergeant Buzzfuzz, folding his arms emphatically and turning half round to the jury, as if in a mute assurance that he would bother the witness yet, "do you mean to tell me, Mr. Weller, that you saw nothing of this fainting on the part of the plaintiff in the arms of the defendant, which you have heard described by the witnesses?" "Certainly not," replied Sam. "I was in the passage till they called me up, and then the old lady was not there." "Now attend, Mr. Weller," said Sergeant Buzzfuzz, dipping a large pen into the inkstand before him, for the purpose of frightening Sam with a show of taking down his answer. "You were in the passage, and yet saw nothing of what was going forward. Have you a pair of eyes, Mr. Weller?" "Yes, I have a pair of eyes," replied Sam, "and that's just it. If they was a pair of patent double-million magnifying gas microscopes of extra power, perhaps I might be able to see through a flight of stairs and a deal door. But being only eyes, you see, my vision's limited." At this answer, which was delivered without the slightest appearance of irritation, and with the most complete simplicity and equanimity of manner, the spectators tittered, the little judge smiled, and Sergeant Buzzfuzz looked particularly foolish.
The gentleman from Bengal was standing disconcerted by this incident when the door of number 92 opened of itself, and Becky's little head peeped out full of archness and mischief. She lighted on Joss. "It's you," she said, coming out. "How I have been waiting for you. Stop, not yet. In 1 minute you shall come in." In that instant she put a rouge pot, a brandy bottle, and a plate of broken meat into the bed, gave one smooth to her hair, and finally let in her visitor. She had, by way of morning robe, a pink domino, a trifle faded and soiled, and marked here and there with pomatum. but her arms shone out from the loose sleeves of the dress, very white and fair, and it was tied round her little waist, so as not ill to set off the trim little figure of the wearer. She led Joss by the hand into her garret. "Come in," she said. "Come and talk to me. Sit yonder on the chair." And she gave the civilian's hand a little squeeze, and laughingly placed him upon it. As for herself, she placed herself on the bed, not on the bottle and plate, you may be sure, on which Joss might have reposed had he chosen that seat. And so there she sat and talked with her old admirer. "How little years have changed you," she said with a look of tender interest. "I should have known you anywhere. What a comfort it is amongst strangers to see once more the frank, honest face of an old friend." The frank, honest face, to tell the truth, at this moment bore any expression but one of openness and honesty. It was, on the contrary, much perturbed and puzzled in look. Joss was surveying the queer little apartment in which he found his old flame. One of her gowns hung over the bed, another depending from a hook of the door. Her bonnet obscured half the looking-glass, on which, too, lay the prettiest little pair of bronze boots. A French novel was on the table by the bedside, with a candle not of wax. Becky thought of popping that into the bed, too, but she only put in the little paper nightcap with which she had put the candle out on going to sleep. "I should have known you anywhere," she continued. "A woman never forgets some things, and you were the first man I ever saw." "Was I really?" said Joss. "God bless my soul. You don't say so." "When I came with your sister from Chiswick, I was scarcely more than a child," Becky said. "How is that, dear love? Oh, her husband was a sad, wicked man, and of course it was of me that the poor dear was jealous. As if I cared about him. Hey-ho, when there was somebody. But no, don't let us talk of old times." And she passed her handkerchief with the tattered lace across her eyelids. "Is not this a strange place," she continued, "for a woman who has lived in a very different world, too, to be found in? I've had so many griefs and wrongs, Joseph Sedley. I have been made to suffer so cruelly that I'm almost made mad sometimes. I can't stay still in any place, but wander about, always restless and unhappy. All my friends have been false to me, all. There's no such thing as an honest man in the world. I was the truest wife that ever lived, though I married my husband out of pique because somebody else... but never mind that. I was true, and he trampled upon me and deserted me. I was the fondest mother. I had but one child, one darling, one hope, one joy, which I held to my heart with a mother's affection, which was my life, my prayer, my blessing. And they tore it from me, tore it from me." And she put her hand to her heart with a passionate gesture of despair, burying her face for a moment on the bed. The brandy bottle inside clinked up against the plate which held the cold sausage. Both were moved, no doubt, by the exhibition of so much grief. Max and Fritz were at the door listening with wonder to Mrs. Becky's sobs and cries. Joss, too, was a good deal frightened and affected at seeing his old flame in this condition. And she began forthwith to tell her story, a tale so neat, simple, and artless that it was quite evident from hearing her that if ever there was a white-robed angel escaped from heaven to be subject to the infernal machinations and villainy of fiends here below, that spotless being, that miserable, unsullied martyr, was present on the bed before Joss, on the bed, sitting on the brandy bottle.
But I think the noblest sea that Turner has ever painted, and if so the noblest certainly ever painted by man, is that of the Slave Ship, the chief Academy picture of the exhibition of 1840. It is a sunset on the Atlantic after prolonged storm, but the storm is partially lulled, and the torn and streaming rain clouds are moving in scarlet lines to lose themselves in the hollow of the night. The whole surface of sea included in the picture is divided into two ridges of enormous swell, not high nor local, but a low, broad heaving of the whole ocean, like the lifting of its bosom by deep-drawn breath after the torture of the storm. Between these two ridges, the fire of the sunset falls along the trough of the sea, dyeing it with an awful but glorious light, the intense and lurid splendour which burns like gold and bathes like blood. Along this fiery path and valley, the tossing waves by which the swell of the sea is restlessly divided lift themselves in dark, indefinite, fantastic forms, each casting a faint and ghastly shadow behind it along the illumined foam. They do not rise everywhere, but 3 or 4 together in wild groups, fitfully and furiously, as the under-strength of the swell compels or permits them, leaving between them treacherous spaces of level and whirling water, now lighted with green and lamp-like fire, now flashing back the gold of the declining sun, now fearfully dyed from above with the indistinguishable images of the burning clouds, which fall upon them in flakes of crimson and scarlet, and give to the reckless waves the added motion of their own fiery flying. Purple and blue, the lurid shadows of the hollow breakers are cast upon the mist of the night, which gathers cold and low, advancing like the shadow of death upon the guilty ship, as it labours amidst the lightning of the sea, its thin masts written upon the sky in lines of blood, girded with condemnation in that fearful hue which signs the sky with horror and mixes its flaming flood with the sunlight, and, cast far along the desolate heave of the sepulchral waves, incarnadines the multitudinous sea. I believe if I were reduced to rest Turner's immortality upon any single work, I should choose this. Its daring conception, ideal in the highest sense of the word, is based on the purest truth and wrought out with the concentrated knowledge of a life. Its colour is absolutely perfect, not one false or morbid hue in any part or line, and so modulated that every square inch of canvas is a perfect composition. Its drawing as accurate as fearless, the ship buoyant, bending, and full of motion, its tones as true as they are wonderful, and the whole picture dedicated to the most sublime of subjects and impressions, completing thus the perfect system of all truth which we have shown to be formed by Turner's works, the power, majesty, and deathfulness of the open, deep, illimitable sea.
What is strangest is that Botticelli carries this sentiment into classical subjects, its most complete expression being a picture in the Uffizi of Venus rising from the sea, in which the grotesque emblems of the Middle Age and a landscape full of its peculiar feeling and even its strange draperies, powdered all over in the Gothic manner with a quaint conceit of daisies, frame a figure that reminds you of the faultless, nude studies of Ingres. At first, perhaps, you are attracted only by a quaintness of design, which seems to recall, all at once, whatever you have read of Florence in the 15th century. Afterwards, you may think that this quaintness must be incongruous with the subject, and that the colour is cadaverous, or at least cold. And yet, the more you come to understand what imaginative colouring really is, that all colour is no mere delightful quality of natural things, but a spirit upon them by which they become expressive to the spirit, the better you will like this peculiar quality of colour. And you will find that quaint design of Botticelli's a more direct inlet into the Greek temper than the works of the Greeks themselves, even of the finest period. Of the Greeks as they really were, of their difference from ourselves, of the aspects of their outward life, we know far more than Botticelli or his most learned contemporaries. But for us, long familiarity has taken off the edge of the lesson, and we are hardly conscious of what we owe to the Hellenic spirit. But in pictures like this of Botticelli's, you have a record of the first impression made by it on minds turned back towards it in almost painful aspiration from a world in which it had been ignored so long. And in the passion, the energy, the industry of realization with which Botticelli carries out his intention is the exact measure of the legitimate influence over the human mind of the imaginative system of which this is the central myth. The light is indeed cold, mere sunless dawn, but a later painter would have cloyed you with sunshine, and you can see the better for that quietness in the morning air, each long promontory as it slopes down to the water's edge. Men go forth to their labours until the evening, but she is awake before them, and you might think that the sorrow in her face was at the thought of the whole long day of love yet to come. An emblematical figure of the wind blows hard across the grey water, moving forward the dainty-lipped shell on which she sails, the sea showing his teeth as it moves in thin lines of foam, and sucking in, one by one, the falling roses, each severe in outline, plucked off short at the stalk, but embrowned a little, as Botticelli's flowers always are. Botticelli meant all that imagery to be altogether pleasurable, and it was partly an incompleteness of resources, inseparable from the art of that time, that subdued and chilled it. But his predilection for minor tones counts also, and what is unmistakable is the sadness with which he has conceived the goddess of pleasure as the depository of a great power over the lives of men.
I saw indeed clearly that my place in the movement was lost. Public confidence was at an end, my occupation was gone. It was simply an impossibility that I could say anything henceforth to good effect, when I had been posted up by the marshal on the buttery hatch of every college of my university after the manner of discommon pastry cooks, and when in every part of the country and every class of society, through every organ and opportunity of opinion, in newspapers, in periodicals, at meetings, in pulpits, at dinner tables, in coffee rooms, in railway carriages, I was denounced as a traitor who had laid his train and was detected in the very act of firing it against the time-honoured establishment. There were indeed men, besides my own immediate friends, men of name and position, who gallantly took my part, as Dr. Hook, Mr. Palmer, and Mr. Percival. It must have been a grievous trial for themselves, yet what, after all, could they do for me? Confidence in me was lost, but I had already lost full confidence in myself. Thoughts had passed over me a year and a half before in respect to the Anglican claims, which for the time had profoundly troubled me. They had gone. I had not less confidence in the power and the prospects of the apostolical movement than before, not less confidence than before in the grievousness of what I called the dominant errors of Rome. But how was I any more to have absolute confidence in myself? How was I to have confidence in my present confidence? How was I to be sure that I should always think as I thought now? I felt that by this event a kind providence had saved me from an impossible position in the future. First, if I remember right, they wished me to withdraw the tract. This I refused to do. I would not do so for the sake of those who were unsettled or in danger of unsettlement. I would not do so for my own sake. For how could I acquiesce in a mere Protestant interpretation of the Articles? How could I range myself among the professors of a theology of which it put my teeth on edge even to hear the sound? Next they said, "Keep silence, do not defend the tract." I answered, "Yes, if you will not condemn it, if you will allow it to continue on sale." They pressed on me whenever I gave way. They fell back when they saw me obstinate. Their line of action was to get out of me as much as they could, but upon the point of their tolerating the tract, I was obstinate. So they let me continue it on sale, and they said they would not condemn it. But they said that this was on condition that I did not defend it, that I stopped the series, and that I myself published my own condemnation in a letter to the Bishop of Oxford. I impute nothing whatever to him. He was ever most kind to me. Also, they said they could not answer for what some individual bishops might perhaps say about the tract in their own charges. I agreed to their conditions. My one point was to save the tract. Not a line in writing was given me as a pledge of the observance of the main article on their side of the engagement. Parts of letters from them were read to me without being put into my hands. It was an understanding. A clever man had warned me against understandings some 13 years before. I have hated them ever since.
However, it is not merely out of modesty that I prefer to stand alone and to concentrate on myself as a plain citizen of the Republic of Letters, and not as an office-bearer in a hierarchy, the whole responsibility for all I write. It is much more out of genuine devotion to the University of Oxford, for which I feel, and always must feel, the fondest, the most reverential attachment. In an epoch of dissolution and transformation, such as that on which we are now entered, habits, ties, and associations are inevitably broken up. The action of individuals becomes more distinct. The shortcomings, errors, heats, disputes, which necessarily attend individual action, are brought into greater prominence. Who would not gladly keep clear from all these passing clouds an august institution which was there before they arose and which will be there when they have blown over? No, we are all seekers still. Seekers often make mistakes, and I wish mine to redound to my own discredit only, and not to touch Oxford. Beautiful city, so venerable, so lovely, so unravaged by the fierce intellectual life of our century, so serene. There are our young barbarians, all at play. And yet, steeped in sentiment as she lies, spreading her gardens to the moonlight, and whispering from her towers the last enchantments of the Middle Age. Who will deny that Oxford, by her ineffable charm, keeps ever calling us nearer to the true goal of all of us, to the ideal, to perfection, to beauty, in a word, which is only truth seen from another side, nearer perhaps than all the science of Tübingen. Adorable dreamer, whose heart has been so romantic, who hast given thyself so prodigally, given thyself to sides and to heroes, not mine, only never to the Philistines. Home of lost causes and forsaken beliefs and unpopular names and impossible loyalties. What example could ever so inspire us to keep down the Philistine in ourselves? What teacher could ever so save us from that bondage to which we are all prone? That bondage which Goethe, in his incomparable lines on the death of Schiller, makes it his friend's highest praise, and nobly did Schiller deserve the praise, to have left miles out of sight behind him the bondage of was uns alle bändigt, das Gemeine. She will forgive me, even if I have unwittingly drawn upon her a shot or two aimed at her unworthy son. For she is generous, and the cause in which I fight is, after all, hers. Apparitions of a day, what is our puny warfare against the Philistines, compared with the warfare which this queen of romance has been waging against them for centuries, and will wage after we are gone?
They went in procession along the bright and slippery corridor, dimly lighted by the semi-lunar top of the window which rose above the closed shutter. It was really quite solemn. Aunt Pullet paused and unlocked a door which opened on something still more solemn than the passage, a darkened room, in which the outer light, entering feebly, showed what looked like the corpses of furniture in white shrouds. Everything that was not shrouded stood with its legs upwards. Lucy laid hold of Maggie's frock, and Maggie's heart beat rapidly. Aunt Pullet half opened the shutter, and then unlocked the wardrobe, with a melancholy deliberateness which was quite in keeping with the funereal solemnity of the scene. The delicious scent of rose leaves that issued from the wardrobe made the process of taking out sheet after sheet of silver paper quite pleasant to assist at, though the sight of the bonnet at last was an anticlimax to Maggie, who would have preferred something more strikingly preternatural. But few things could have been more impressive to Mrs. Tulliver. She looked all round it in silence for some moments, and then said emphatically, "Well, sister, I'll never speak against the full crowns again." It was a great concession, and Mrs. Pullet felt it. She felt something was due to it. "You'd like to see it on, sister," she said sadly. "I'll open the shutter a bit further." "Well, if you don't mind taking off your cap, sister," said Mrs. Tulliver. Mrs. Pullet took off her cap, displaying the brown silk scalp with a jutting promontory of curls, which was common to the more mature and judicious women of those times, and placing the bonnet on her head, turned slowly round like a draper's lay figure, that Mrs. Tulliver might miss no point of view. "I've sometimes thought there's a loop too much a ribbon on this left side, sister. What do you think?" said Mrs. Pullet. Mrs. Tulliver looked earnestly at the point indicated and turned her head on one side. "Well, I think it's best as it is. If you meddled with it, sister, you might repent." "That's true," said Aunt Pullet, taking off the bonnet and looking at it contemplatively. "How much might she charge you for that bonnet, sister?" said Mrs. Tulliver, whose mind was actively engaged on the possibility of getting a humble imitation of this chef-d'oeuvre made from a piece of silk she had at home. Mrs. Pullet screwed up her mouth and shook her head, and then whispered, "Pullet pays for it. He said I was to have the best bonnet at Garum Church, let the next best be whose it would." She began slowly to adjust the trimmings in preparation for returning it to its place in the wardrobe, and her thoughts seemed to have taken a melancholy turn, for she shook her head. "Ah," she said at last, "I may never wear it twice, sister. Who knows?" "Don't talk of that, sister," answered Mrs. Tulliver. "I hope you'll have your health this summer." "Ah, but there may come a death in the family, as there did soon after I had my green satin bonnet. Cousin Abbott may go, and we can't think of wearing crape less nor half a year for him." "That would be unlucky," said Mrs. Tulliver, entering thoroughly into the possibility of an inopportune decease. "There's never so much pleasure in wearing a bonnet the second year, especially when the crowns are so chancy, never two summers alike." "Ah, it's the way of this world," said Mrs. Pullet, returning the bonnet to the wardrobe and locking it up. She maintained a silence characterized by head-shaking until they had all issued from the solemn chamber and were in her own room again. Then, beginning to cry, she said, "Sister, if you should never see that bonnet again till I'm dead and gone, you'll remember I showed it you this day."
Not a human being was out of doors at the dairy. The denizens were all enjoying the usual afternoon nap of an hour or so, which the exceedingly early hours kept in summer-time rendered a necessity. At the door, the wood-hooped pails, sodden and bleached by infinite scrubbings, hung like hats on a stand upon the forked and peeled limb of an oak fixed there for that purpose. all of them ready and dry for the evening milking. Angel entered and went through the silent passages of the house to the back quarters, where he listened for a moment. Sustained snores came from the cart-house where some of the men were lying down. The grunt and squeal of sweltering pigs arose from the still further distance. The large-leaved rhubarb and cabbage plants slept too, their broad, limp surfaces hanging in the sun like half-closed umbrellas. He unbridled and fed his horse, and as he re-entered the house, the clock struck 3. 3 was the afternoon skimming hour, and with the stroke, Claire heard the creaking of the floorboards above, and then the touch of a descending foot on the stairs. It was Tess's, who in another moment came down before his eyes. She had not heard him enter, and hardly realized his presence there. She was yawning, and he saw the red interior of her mouth as if it had been a snake's. She stretched one arm so high above her coiled-up cable of hair that he could see it set in delicacy above the sunburn. Her face was flushed with sleep, and her eyelids hung heavy over their pupils. The brimfulness of her nature breathed from her. It was a moment when a woman's soul is more incarnate than at any other time, when the most spiritual beauty bespeaks itself flesh, and sex takes the outside place in the presentation. Then those eyes flashed brightly through their filmy heaviness before the remainder of her face was well awake. With an oddly compounded look of gladness, shyness, and surprise, she exclaimed, "Oh, Mr. Clare, how you frightened me. There had not at first been time for her to think of the changed relations which his declaration had introduced, but the full sense of the matter rose up in her face when she encountered Clare's tender look as he stepped forward to the bottom stair. "Dear, darling Tessie," he whispered, putting his arm round her and his face to her flushed cheek. "Don't for heaven's sake mister me any more. I have hastened back so soon because of you." Tessie's excitable heart beat against his by way of reply, and there they stood upon the red brick floor of the entry, the sun slanting in by the window upon his back as he held her tightly to his breast, upon her inclining face, upon the blue veins of her temple, upon her naked arm and her neck, and into the depths of her hair. Having been lying down in her clothes, she was warm as a sunned cat. At first she would not look straight up at him, but her eyes soon lifted, and his plumbed the deepness of the ever-varying pupils with their radiating fibrils of blue and black and grey and violet, while she regarded him as Eve at her second waking might have regarded Adam.
The Red Queen drew herself up rather stiffly and said, "Queens never make bargains." "I wish queens never asked questions," Alice thought to herself. "Don't let us quarrel," the White Queen said in an anxious tone. "What is the cause of lightning?" "The cause of lightning," Alice said very decidedly, for she felt quite certain about this, "is the thunder." No, she hastily corrected herself. "I meant the other way." "It's too late to correct it," said the Red Queen. "When you've once said a thing, that fixes it, and you must take the consequences." "Which reminds me," the White Queen said, looking down and nervously clasping and unclasping her hands, "we had such a thunderstorm last Tuesday. I mean one of the last set of Tuesdays, you know." Alice was puzzled. "In our country," she remarked, "there's only one day at a time." The Red Queen said, "That's a poor thin way of doing things. Now here we mostly have days and nights, 2 or 3 at a time, and sometimes in the winter we take as many as 5 nights together. For warmth, you know." "Are 5 nights warmer than 1 night, then?" Alice ventured to ask. 5 times as warm, of course. But they should be 5 times as cold by the same rule. Just so, cried the Red Queen. 5 times as warm and 5 times as cold, just as I'm 5 times as rich as you are and 5 times as clever. Alice sighed and gave it up. It's exactly like a riddle with no answer, she thought. Humpty Dumpty saw it too, the White Queen went on in a low voice, more as if she were talking to herself. He came to the door with a corkscrew in his hand. What did he want? Said the Red Queen. He said he would come in, the White Queen went on, because he was looking for a hippopotamus. Now, as it happened, there wasn't such a thing in the house that morning. Is that generally? Alice asked in an astonished tone. Well, only on Thursdays, said the Queen. I know what he came for, said Alice. He wanted to punish the fish, because... Here the White Queen began again. It was such a thunderstorm, you can't think. She never could, you know, said the Red Queen. And part of the roof came off, and ever so much thunder got in, and it went rolling round the room in great lumps, and knocking over the tables and things, till I was so frightened I couldn't remember my own name. Alice thought to herself, I never should try to remember my name in the middle of an accident. Where would be the use of it? But she did not say this aloud, for fear of hurting the poor Queen's feelings. Your Majesty must excuse her, the Red Queen said to Alice, taking one of the White Queen's hands in her own and gently stroking it. She means well, but she can't help saying foolish things as a general rule. The White Queen looked timidly at Alice. She felt she ought to say something kind, but really couldn't think of anything at the moment. She never was really well brought up, the Red Queen went on, but it's amazing how good-tempered she is. Pat her on the head and see how pleased she'll be. But this was more than Alice had courage to do. A little kindness and putting her hair in papers would do wonders with her. The White Queen gave a deep sigh and laid her head on Alice's shoulder. I am so sleepy, she moaned. She's tired, poor thing, said the Red Queen. Smooth her hair, lend her your nightcap, and sing her a soothing lullaby. I haven't got a nightcap with me, said Alice, as she tried to obey the first direction. And I don't know any soothing lullabies. I must do it myself, then, said the Red Queen, and she began. Hush-a-bye, lady, in Alice's lap. Till the feast's ready, we've time for a nap. When the feast's over, we'll go to the ball. Red Queen and White Queen and Alice and all. And now you know the words, she added, as she put her head down on Alice's other shoulder. Just sing it through to me. I'm getting sleepy too. In another moment, both queens were fast asleep and snoring loud.
The day after the funeral, and about 3 o'clock of a bitter, foggy, frosty afternoon, I was standing at the door for a moment, full of sad thoughts about my father, when I saw someone drawing slowly near along the road. He was plainly blind, for he tapped before him with a stick, and wore a great green shade over his eyes and nose, and he was hunched, as if with age or weakness, and wore a huge old tattered sea-cloak with a hood, that made him appear positively deformed. I never saw in my life a more dreadful-looking figure. He stopped a little from the inn, and raising his voice in an odd sing-song, addressed the air in front of him. Will any kind friend inform a poor blind man who has lost the precious sight of his eyes in the gracious defence of his native country, England, and God bless King George, where or in what part of this country he may now be? You are at the Admiral Benbow, Black Hill Cove, my good man, said I. I hear a voice, said he, a young voice. Will you give me your hand, my kind young friend, and lead me in? I held out my hand, and the horrible, soft-spoken, eyeless creature gripped it in a moment like a vice. I was so much startled that I struggled to withdraw, but the blind man pulled me close up to him with a single action of his arm. Now, boy, he said, take me into the captain. "Sir," said I, "upon my word I dare not." "Oh," he sneered, "that's it. Take me in straight, or I'll break your arm." And he gave it as he spoke a wrench that made me cry out. "Sir," I said, "it is for yourself I mean. The captain is not what he used to be. He sits with a drawn cutlass. Another gentleman—" "Come now, march," interrupted he, and I never heard a voice so cruel and cold and ugly as that blind man's. It cowed me more than the pain, and I began to obey him at once, walking straight in at the door and towards the parlour, where our sick old buccaneer was sitting dazed with rum. The blind man clung close to me, holding me in one iron fist, and leaning almost more of his weight on me than I could carry. "Lead me straight up to him, and when I'm in view, cry out, 'Here's a friend for you, Bill. If you don't, I'll do this.'" And with that he gave me a twitch that I thought would have made me faint. Between this and that, I was so utterly terrified of the blind beggar that I forgot my terror of the captain, and as I opened the parlour door, cried out the words he had ordered in a trembling voice. The poor captain raised his eyes, and at one look the rum went out of him and left him staring sober. The expression of his face was not so much of terror as of mortal sickness. He made a movement to rise, but I do not believe he had enough force left in his body. "Now, Bill, sit where you are," said the beggar. "If I can't see, I can hear a finger stirring. Business is business. Hold out your right hand. Boy, take his right hand by the wrist and bring it near to my right." We both obeyed him to the letter, and I saw him pass something from the hollow of the hand that held his stick into the palm of the captain's, which closed upon it instantly. "And now that's done," said the blind man, and at the words he suddenly left hold of me, and with incredible accuracy and nimbleness skipped out of the parlour and into the road, where, as I stood motionless, I could hear his stick go tap, tap, tapping into the distance. It was some time before either I or the captain seemed to gather our senses, but at length, and about at the same moment, I released his wrist, which I was still holding, and he drew in his hand and looked sharply into the palm. 10 o'clock, he cried. 6 hours, we'll do 'em yet. And he sprang to his feet. Even as he did so, he reeled, put his hand to his throat, stood swaying for a moment, and then, with a peculiar sound, fell from his whole height face foremost to the floor.
Sir Willoughby looked the fittest. He justified the dictum of science. The survival of the patterns was assured. "I would," he said to his admirer, Mrs. Mountstuart Jenkinson, "have bargained for health above everything. But she has everything besides. Lineage, beauty, breeding, is what they call an heiress, and is the most accomplished of her sex." With a delicate art, he conveyed to the lady's understanding that Miss Middleton had been snatched from a crowd without a breath of the crowd having offended his niceness. He did it through sarcasm at your modern young women who run about the world nibbling and nibbled at until they know one sex as well as the other, and not a whit less cognizant of the market than men. Pure, possibly. It is not so easy to say innocent. Decidedly not our feminine ideal. Miss Middleton was different. She was the true ideal, fresh gathered morning fruit in a basket, warranted by her bloom. Women do not defend their younger sisters for doing what they perhaps have done, lifting a veil to be seen and peeping at a world where innocence is as poor a guarantee as a babe's call against shipwreck. Women of the world never think of attacking the sensual stipulation for perfect bloom, silver purity, which is redolent of the oriental origin of the love passion of their lords. Mrs. Mountstuart congratulated Sir Willoughby on the prize he had won in the fair Western Eastern. "Let me see her," she said, and Miss Middleton was introduced and critically observed. she had the mouth that smiles in repose. The lips met full in the center of the bow and thinned along to a lifting dimple. The eyelids also lifted slightly at the outer corners and seemed, like the lip into the limpid cheek, quickening up the temples as with a run of light, or the ascension indicated off a shoot of color. Her features were playfellows of one another, none of them pretending to rigid correctness, nor the nose to the ordinary dignity of governess among merry girls, despite which the nose was of a fair design, not acutely interrogative or inviting to gambols. Aspens imaged in water, waiting for the breeze, would offer a susceptible lover some suggestion of her face. A pure, smooth, white face, tenderly flushed in the cheeks, where the gentle dints were faintly intermelting even during quietness. Her eyes were brown, set well between mild lids, often shadowed, not unwakeful. Her hair of lighter brown, swelling above her temples on the sweep to the knot, imposed the triangle of the fabulous wild woodland visage from brow to mouth and chin, evidently in agreement with her taste, and the triangle suited her. But her face was not significant of a tameless wildness or of weakness. Her equable shut mouth threw its long curve to guard the small round chin from that effect. Her eyes wavered only in humor. They were steady when thoughtfulness was awakened, and at such seasons the build of her winter beechwood hair lost the touch of nymph-like and whimsical, and strangely, by mere outline, added to her appearance of studious concentration. Observe the hawk on stretched wings over the prey he spies, for an idea of this change in the look of a young lady, whom Vernon Whitford could liken to the mountain echo, and Mrs. Mountstuart Jenkinson pronounced to be a dainty rogue in porcelain.
For some time the pair said nothing. What they must have felt during their first half hour, the reader must guess, for it is beyond my power to tell him. At the end of that time, however, Theobald had rummaged up a conclusion from some odd corner of his soul, to the effect that now he and Christina were married, the sooner they fell into their future mutual relations, the better. If people who are in a difficulty will only do the first little reasonable thing, which they can clearly recognize as reasonable, they will always find the next step more easy both to see and take. What then, thought Theobald, was here at this moment the first and most obvious matter to be considered, and what would be an equitable view of his and Christina's relative positions in respect to it? Clearly their first dinner was their first joint entry into the duties and pleasures of married life. No less clearly, it was Christina's duty to order it, and his own to eat it and pay for it. The arguments leading to this conclusion, and the conclusion itself, flashed upon Theobald about 3.5 miles after he had left Crampsford on the road to Newmarket. He had breakfasted early, but his usual appetite had failed him. They had left the vicarage at noon, without staying for the wedding breakfast. Theobald liked an early dinner. It dawned upon him that he was beginning to be hungry. From this to the conclusions stated in the preceding paragraph, the steps had been easy. After a few minutes' further reflection, he broached the matter to his bride, and thus the ice was broken. Mrs. Theobald was not prepared for so sudden an assumption of importance. Her nerves, never of the strongest, had been strung to their highest tension by the event of the morning. She wanted to escape observation. She was conscious of looking a little older than she quite liked to look as a bride who had been married that morning. She feared the landlady, the chambermaid, the waiter, everybody and everything. Her heart beat so fast that she could hardly speak, much less go through the ordeal of ordering dinner in a strange hotel with a strange landlady. She begged and prayed to be let off. If Theobald would only order dinner this once, she would order it any day and every day in future. But the inexorable Theobald was not to be put off with such absurd excuses. He was master now. Had not Christina, less than 2 hours ago, promised solemnly to honour and obey him, and was she turning restive over such a trifle as this? The loving smile departed from his face, and was succeeded by a scowl which that old Turk, his father, might have envied. "Stuff and nonsense, my dearest Christina," he exclaimed mildly, and stamped his foot upon the floor of the carriage. "It is a wife's duty to order her husband's dinner. You are my wife, and I shall expect you to order mine." Theobald was nothing if he was not logical. The bride began to cry, and said he was unkind, whereon he said nothing, but revolved unutterable things in his heart. Was this, then, the end of his 6 years of unflagging devotion? Was it for this that when Christina had offered to let him off, he had stuck to his engagement? Was this the outcome of her talks about duty and spiritual mindedness, that now, upon the very day of her marriage, she should fail to see that the first step in obedience to God lay in obedience to himself? He would drive back to Crampsford. He would complain to Mr. and Mrs. Allaby. He didn't mean to have married Christina. He hadn't married her. It was all a hideous dream. He would... But a voice kept ringing in his ears which said, "You can't. Can't I?" screamed the unhappy creature to himself. "No," said the remorseless voice, "you can't. You are a married man." He rolled back in his corner of the carriage, and for the first time felt how iniquitous were the marriage laws of England.